Have you ever looked up at the moon and thought it was just too perfect? A near-perfect sphere, suspended in the sky at just the right distance to eclipse the sun completely during a total solar eclipse. A cosmic coincidence so precise it borders on impossible. Its apparent size matches the sun's with eerie exactness, though they're separated by nearly 400 times the distance. We call it a natural satellite. But why is there nothing else like it in the solar system? No other moon has such a strange mass ratio to its host planet. No other exerts such deep, rhythmic pulls on tides, magnetism, inertia, even biology. And have you ever heard the theory that the moon might not be natural at all? Not an ancient asteroid, not a chunk of debris, but a construct, a machine, a memory encased in silence. You don't have to believe it. You only have to listen and step gently into the hidden strata of history. Welcome to Deformed History. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right, and let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. It was in July 1969 that humanity first stepped onto the moon. Or so we tell ourselves. But few remember what happened 2 months earlier. In May, during the Apollo 10 mission, a strange sound crackled through the radios as the command module slipped behind the moon's far side, cut off from all communication with Earth. A long whistling noise, almost musical, almost synthetic, echoed through the headphones of the astronauts. "It sounds like outer space-type music," one said. The incident was logged, dismissed, then buried for decades under the weight of silence. And yet the sound was real, it was recorded, it was replayed, and then it was forgotten. That whisper in the void, that anomaly in the static, was never fully explained. Some said it was just radio interference. Others admitted quietly that they weren't sure. It came from the moon's far side, the side that never faces Earth. A place of permanent shadow, a hemisphere locked in stillness. This strange hum was not the first mystery of the moon, nor would it be the last. For centuries, observers have noted the moon's oddities, its almost perfectly circular orbit, its unusual density, its hollowness. Yes, hollowness. When Apollo 12 crashed a spent lunar module onto the surface in 1969, the moon rang like a bell for more than 50 minutes. Seismic instruments captured the vibrations, and NASA scientists stood in uneasy silence. "It rang like a gong," one said, "as if it were hollow." But what does that even mean? A hollow moon? Could a natural satellite sustain such a structure? Could it have formed by accident? Or was it engineered? Is it possible that the moon, the very object that governs our tides, stabilizes our axis, shapes our calendars, is not a coincidence of cosmic debris, but the artifact of some prior intelligence? In 1970, 2 Soviet scientists, Mikhail Vasin and Alexander Sherbakov, proposed a theory that was swiftly ridiculed, yet never disproven. The moon, they argued, might be an ancient spacecraft, a megastructure built by unknown beings, later camouflaged in rock and debris to resemble a natural body. The idea was not metaphor. They meant it literally. Their paper, published in Sputnik, cited unexplained elements, the crust's asymmetrical thickness, the moon's unnaturally stable position, and strange materials recovered from lunar samples, including traces of metals that do not occur naturally in such environments. They speculated that the moon had been deliberately placed in Earth's orbit for a reason. Of course, these ideas were dismissed as pseudoscience, laughed off, discarded. But is dismissal the same as refutation? Step back. Look at the moon as if you had never seen it before. It rotates at the exact speed that always keeps one side hidden. It possesses just the right mass to stabilize Earth's wobble, allowing for seasons, climate, even the slow flowering of life. Without the moon, Earth's axial tilt might swing wildly, turning the planet into a chaos of wind and fire. Some ancient myths speak of a time before the moon. The Zulu people recall a time when the moon was not yet in the sky. Aristotle, writing in the 4th century BCE, references tribes who claimed to have existed before the moon appeared. In ancient Mesopotamian texts, the moon is not born of the earth, but arrives. It is sent. It is installed. And in those stories, the moon is never merely a light. It is a watcher, a regulator, a gate. If we let go of modern certainty, just for a moment, and listen to these fragments not as superstition, but as encrypted memory, what begins to surface? The moon begins to look less like an accident and more like a mechanism, not a celestial ornament, but a tool, or perhaps even a message. But a message from whom, and for what purpose? The Sumerians called her Sin, the divine light who measured time. The Egyptians named her Khonsu, he who travels across the night. The Mayans saw her as Ixchel, weaving the destinies of humans in threads of silver. To the ancient world, the moon was never just a rock in the sky. She was presence. She was power. She was rhythm made visible, breathing over the tides, ripening the womb, stirring sleep and madness in equal measure. But there is a more unsettling pattern buried in these myths, a recurring suggestion that the moon intervened, that something changed when she appeared. What if we take these stories seriously, not as fables, but as echoes? Not literal truth, but fossilized perception, the kind that survives when language fails. In the Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Quiche Maya, there is a passage where the sky is dark, and only after divine action is light divided. The moon is set into place, not born, not formed, but set, as if installed, positioned. Modern scientists speak of the giant impact hypothesis, the prevailing theory that the moon was formed when a Mars-sized body, Theia, collided with Earth 4.5 billion years ago. Debris coalesced, they say, forming the satellite we know. It's a tidy explanation, but one riddled with problems. Lunar rock is nearly identical in isotopic composition to Earth's crust. Too identical. If the moon came from Theia, why is there no sign of foreign material? And then there's the riddle of the moon's orbit, a near-perfect circle, oddly centered on Earth's equator, defying expectations for an object formed through cataclysm. It doesn't wobble like it should. It behaves, strangely, like it was placed with intention. The ancient Greeks hinted at this when they spoke of the Proselines, people who lived before the moon. The Arcadians, a mysterious tribe in the Peloponnese, were said to be older than Selene herself. Before the moon, they claimed, we were already here. The phrase recurs in later Orphic hymns, where the moon's descent is marked not by celebration, but by disruption. Disruption. That word lingers. Geological records show a curious anomaly, a sudden surge in tectonic activity, atmospheric shifts, and magnetosphere instability occurring not long after the estimated appearance of the moon. Correlation is not causation, But causation often wears the mask of coincidence. What if the moon's arrival wasn't just physical? What if it marked a shift in frequency, a recalibration of Earth's biosphere? Could it have acted as a modulator, controlling something more subtle than tides, brainwave patterns, hormonal rhythms, consciousness itself? Such ideas stretch the edges of belief. But belief was never the goal, only exploration. In 1971, NASA scientists published the Lunar Science Conference proceedings after analyzing moon rocks brought back by Apollo missions. Among the findings was the presence of materials like brass, mica, and even traces of uranium-236 and neptunium-237, elements not found naturally in such contexts. Uranium-236 is a nuclear waste product. Neptunium-237 is used in fast neutron reactors. Their presence remains unexplained. Some dismissed these as contamination. Others stayed quiet. What if these materials are remnants, not of natural formation, but of function? What if the moon once did something, stored energy, directed signals, stabilized resonance? Was it inert when we found it, or simply dormant? In 1965, a mysterious code was discovered in the rhythm of lunar orbit known as the lunar synchrony. The moon rotates on its axis at the exact rate it revolves around Earth, always keeping one face hidden. Tidal locking, they call it. A natural outcome, they say. But nature is rarely so clean, always the same face, always the same silence. What then lies on the other side? The far side of the moon, misnamed the dark side, remained unseen by human eyes until 1959, when the Soviet probe Luna 3 captured its first grainy images. What it revealed was a surface scarred with deep craters, almost devoid of the wide, flat plains that mark the side we know. Why such asymmetry? Why such violence on one face and serenity on the other? Some say it's cosmic coincidence. Others whisper it's shielding. From what? They say the far side of the moon is quiet, deathly quiet. Not just because it's shielded from Earth's radio noise, but because it seems acoustically mute. When Apollo 16 passed over it, the instruments recorded a silence beyond silence, not the kind that soothes, the kind that unsettles, a silence that feels designed. Even now, no nation has built a permanent base on the far side. No probe has returned soil from its depths. China's Chang'e 4 was the first to land there in 2019, but the data, as always, was filtered, sanitized. The images were sharp, but strangely dull. No anomalies reported, no findings declared. Just rock, they said. Always just rock. But what if that rock is more than it appears? Let us step away from engineering, from physics, from classical astronomy, and into symbol, into pattern, into myth. In countless traditions, the moon is linked not to light, but to veil. In Vedic cosmology, she is Chandra, the mind of the universe, waxing and waning in cycles of illusion. In Gnostic texts, the moon is the realm of the archons, the rulers of illusion, who shape perception, not matter. In Kabbalistic thought, she is Yesod, the foundation, the filter through which divine energy enters physical form. Always the moon stands between light and darkness, between signal and reception. Could this symbolism be more than poetry? Could the ancients have sensed, or remembered, something we've forgotten? In 1963, Dr. Gordon MacDonald of NASA stated, "It would seem that the moon is more like a hollow than a homogeneous sphere." He wasn't writing for the public. He was writing for other scientists in technical journals few would read. Years later, seismologists confirmed that the moon's density is so low it defies models of natural formation. Its mass is disproportionately concentrated in its crust, while the core remains anomalously light. When struck by meteors, it reverberates for hours, sometimes days, not like a rock, like a shell. And here, a strange coincidence. In ancient Chinese mythology, the moon was known as a palace, the domain of the immortals. In the story of Chang'e, the moon is not just a destination. It's a refuge, a containment, a prison of light. She flees there with the elixir of life and is never seen again. In the Babylonian Enuma Elish, the moon is born not from the gods, but from intervention. The gods set the moon to regulate the night, a verb chosen deliberately, not formed, but set, as if installed, as if switched on. This same motif appears in the Book of Enoch, a text once revered, then banned, then forgotten. There, the moon is described not as a body, but as a mechanism, with precise paths, cycles, and deviations known only to the watchers, a mysterious race of beings who descended to Earth in a time before time. And here we reach an edge, one we are not meant to cross. For the deeper we peer into the moon's lore, the more we find these watchers, these architects, these invisible presences who are always just beyond the veil. They don't speak directly. They do not leave clear signs. Instead, they carve symbols into memory, into stone, myth, dream. They leave questions embedded in structure. Geometry becomes language. Light becomes code. Could the moon be part of this code? There are lunar craters that are perfectly hexagonal. Not all, but some. Craters that should have radial spray patterns instead show concentric rings. Some have walls sharper than physics allows, as if molded. One crater, Paracelsus C, has a central dome with angular ridges surrounded by trenches too regular for chance. Natural formation, they say. Random impacts. But randomness at scale has its own pattern, and these patterns whisper design. Design implies function. Function implies intent. But to what end? Why place a mechanism in the sky that can be seen by all, yet understood by none? Was it meant to stabilize, to observe, to manipulate? Or was it meant to trigger something, an awakening, a forgetting, a remembering? We often ask, is there life beyond Earth? But we rarely ask, is there memory? In 1976, Soviet astrophysicist Dr. Yosef Shklovsky offered a proposition so radical that most scientists ignored it entirely. In his book, Intelligent Life in the Universe, co-authored with Carl Sagan, Shklovsky speculated, cautiously, almost nervously, that Phobos, the inner moon of Mars, might be hollow, that its strange acceleration and unusual orbit could only be explained by artificiality. But what he didn't say out loud was this: if one moon could be artificial, why not another? Why not ours? The moon is 400 times smaller than the sun, and just about 400 times closer. This perfect ratio allows it to cover the sun exactly during an eclipse. It is a mathematical alignment so delicate, so improbable, that even the smallest change in distance would ruin the illusion. Coincidence, we're told. But ancient structures across the earth, from Stonehenge to Nabta Playa to the temples of Angkor, were built to track lunar eclipses, solar alignments, and cycles so subtle they required centuries to measure. Who were these people who watched the moon so closely? And why did they care so much? At Teotihuacan, in central Mexico, there stands a vast complex known as the Pyramid of the Moon. Unlike its solar counterpart, the Pyramid of the Moon is aligned not to the cardinal directions, but to the setting moon on certain nights of the year. Beneath it lie chambers filled with mica, a mineral known for its insulating properties in electronics. The origin of this mica remains unknown. It did not come from any nearby deposit. It was brought there. For what purpose? Some researchers point to sound, that the moon, or anything lunar, may resonate not just geologically, but acoustically. Ancient sites around the world have shown acoustic properties far beyond what would be expected from random construction. The hypogeum of Hal Saflieni in Malta, for example, echoes at a frequency that matches the resonance of the human brain's theta waves, the state of meditation, dream, and trance. And the moon itself, when struck by spacecraft, has been measured vibrating at frequencies not unlike those used in sonar and radar. Could the moon have once emitted such frequencies? If so, what would they affect? Magnetite crystals in bird brains align to Earth's magnetic field. Certain insects navigate by polarization of moonlight. And human circadian rhythms, the 24-hour cycle that governs our biology, subtly shift with lunar phases, even in total darkness. A 2013 study published in Current Biology found that human sleep patterns changed during the full moon, despite complete isolation from natural light. The moon, it seems, speaks to the body in ways science still does not understand. But what if it once spoke to something deeper? In the ruins of Tiwanaku, high in the Bolivian Andes, there lies a structure known as the Kalasasaya, a temple aligned to both solar and lunar cycles, built with such precision that modern engineers still debate how it was constructed. The stones are massive, magnetically charged, and cut with such accuracy that even a blade cannot slip between them. One legend says the moon wasn't always in the sky, that it came later, bringing both wisdom and madness. A fragment of the myth describes a time before the moon, when days and nights were chaotic, seasons unpredictable. Then the watchers from above placed the silver mirror in the sky, and rhythm returned. With it came dreaming. With it came language. Language. Some linguists believe that the emergence of structured language in humans, not just vocalization, but complex syntax, coincided roughly with the development of lunar calendars. Could the moon's influence have extended beyond physics, into cognition, into consciousness itself? We don't know. But in 2016, researchers at the University of Arizona published findings that the moon's gravitational pull subtly affects Earth's atmosphere, enough to alter the flow of plasma in the ionosphere. This is the same layer of the sky through which radio waves travel, the same layer used in early long-distance communication. The moon, it turns out, doesn't just pull the seas, it pulls signal. Was it always so? Or was this function once intentional, and now residual? In Japan's oldest chronicle, the Kojiki, the moon god Tsukuyomi is banished from the heavens after committing an unspeakable act, a betrayal so grave that the sun goddess, Amaterasu, refuses ever to see him again. Thus, the sun and moon are forever separated, never appearing in the sky at the same time. But what was the betrayal? The text does not say, only that the moon was once part of something greater, a unity, a balance, and that balance was broken. We look up at the moon now and see serenity, a pale orb in a velvet sky. But the myths tell another story. They speak of rupture, of descent, of silence imposed. A mechanism does not explain why, it only performs. If the moon is a machine, who built it and why? Was it a warning, a prison, a clock? And if it is a clock, What happens when it stops ticking? There's a moment, if you ever find yourself alone in the desert, where the moon seems to expand, not in size, but in weight. The silence thickens. The shadows stretch too far. You begin to feel watched, though there's no one there. Ancient peoples called this the moon's eye, not poetic metaphor, but a literal perception that something or someone was observing, recording, waiting. Was it merely superstition, the human mind projecting fear onto the night? Or did the ancients remember something we've chosen to forget? In 1974, during a Soviet lunar mapping mission, a curious set of photographs emerged showing geometric structures near the Sea of Tranquility, rectilinear formations, angular depressions. One even resembled a hexagonal platform with raised walls. At the time, it was dismissed as photographic error, shadow play. But the original negatives remain, and the geometry has never been explained. Carl Sagan once wrote, "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." But sometimes the absence of explanation is the evidence. Sometimes what is not said, what is dismissed, redacted, or quietly filed away, speaks louder than declarations. Let's return for a moment to the moon ringing like a bell. On November 20th, 1969, the Apollo 12 lunar module was deliberately crashed into the moon's surface. Seismic equipment recorded reverberations that lasted for over 50 minutes, with frequencies clustering around 2.2 Hz. The moon rang, not like a natural body, but like a tuned chamber. Subsequent impacts, including spent rocket stages, repeated the effect. No other celestial body behaves this way. Not Mars, not asteroids. Only the moon. Could it be that the moon contains internal structures, not empty caverns, but resonant chambers? Harmonic nodes? The kind of architecture you'd find inside an instrument or a device. In 1998, the Lunar Prospector mission detected concentrations of hydrogen at the poles, potential signs of water ice. But buried deeper in the mission logs were magnetic anomalies, places on the moon's surface where compasses behaved erratically, where magnetic field lines warped or vanished. These anomalies are clustered in circular patterns, some matching the dimensions of large lunar craters. But why would the moon, an airless, tectonically dead object, have magnetic hotspots? Unless something beneath the surface was generating them. When we look at the moon through the lens of science, we find contradiction. But when we look through the lens of story, of myth, of memory, a strange coherence begins to form. In Dogon cosmology, the moon is called Lebera, the satellite of order, sent by the Nomo, aquatic sky beings who arrived in a vessel that spun and landed with sound. Their teachings include astronomical knowledge, modern science only verified in the 20th century, the existence of Sirius B, the orbital patterns of Jupiter's moons, the elliptical trajectory of Saturn. The Dogon say this knowledge came from the stars, but they also say it was stored in the moon. It's a detail easy to miss, easy to dismiss. But why would a pre-technological culture, isolated in West Africa, encode such specific references to lunar function? Some researchers suggest cultural diffusion, others invoke coincidence. But what if these stories were neither borrowed nor guessed? What if they were remembered? A memory of a time when the moon was not silent, when it spoke. Electromagnetic emissions have been detected from the moon. Bursts, pulses, weak but measurable. NASA's Lunar Atmosphere and Dust Environment Explorer, LADEE, detected such bursts in 2013. but the data was inconclusive. Lunar transients have also been reported for centuries: flashes of light, color shifts, brief glows. The term is transient lunar phenomena, or TLPs. Hundreds of sightings, many by astronomers, remain unexplained. One glow, observed in 1178 by 5 monks in Canterbury, described the moon splitting open and blazing with fire. Was it a meteor, a hallucination, or a glimpse of something activating or failing? Failure is a curious idea. If the moon is a device, could it break down? Could it decay? Some thinkers, like Richard C. Hoagland, have suggested that the moon may once have functioned as a kind of control center. Now inert, its original operators long gone. Its current stability, they say, may be residual, a dying echo of a system once dynamic. Its orbit is increasing by 3.8 centimeters each year, slowly drifting away, slowly unwinding. How long before the alignment fails? And what happens when it does? Without the moon, tides would weaken, the Earth's axis would wobble, climate patterns would spiral. Humanity's rise coincides with lunar stability. Our calendars, our crops, our rituals, all woven around her cycles. Remove her, and the fabric unravels. But more than that, what shifts in consciousness might occur? In the Mahabharata, India's ancient epic, there's a tale of a time when the moon stopped moving, when nights grew long, madness spread, and dreams became indistinguishable from waking life. The hero Arjuna is told by the sage Vyasa that the moon's stillness was a sign, not of apocalypse, but of reconfiguration, a recalibration of reality itself. What kind of machine could alter perception? One that governs rhythm, pattern, frequency. The moon, seen through this lens, is not a reflector of sunlight, but a reflector of structure, a mirror for Earth's invisible systems. It does not shine, it conducts. So we must ask again, not whether the moon is artificial, but whether it is still active. And if not, when was it deactivated, and by whom? In ancient Mesopotamia, lunar priests held the highest rank among stargazers, not the solar priests, not the interpreters of Mars or Jupiter. The moon, always the moon, was the keeper of destiny. Their tablets spoke not of worship, but of watching, recording, measuring, as if the moon were not a god, but a device, a chronometer of divine law. One word appears again and again in those cuneiform texts, Nindarana, the one who writes in the heavens. The moon was not just light, it was inscription, but what was it writing? Modern science has tried to keep the moon grounded, a remnant of violent impact, a captured wanderer, an accidental twin. But none of these theories explain why it fits so perfectly into Earth's needs, why it stabilizes not just weather, but the very preconditions for complex life, as if it were tailored, calibrated. We resist that thought. Design implies a designer. But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe it was not created for us. Maybe it was created before us. There are legends, obscure, half-erased, of a time when the moon hung lower, larger, brighter. In ancient Greek myth, the goddess Selene drove her chariot across the night sky, drawn by white horses. But older fragments hint that her chariot did not move across the sky, it descended, it landed. This idea of a moon that moved recurs quietly across cultures. In Tongan myths, the moon is a canoe that once came to rest above the earth. In Cherokee legend, it was a light once carried by a sister who walked too close to the heavens. In the oral stories of the Klamath people of Oregon, the moon fell to earth, setting fire to the land before rising again, changed, dimmer, hollowed. We are told these are metaphors. But metaphors for what? In 1972, during the Apollo 16 mission, astronauts captured images of strange linear features on the moon's surface, long, rectilinear ridges, sharp and uninterrupted. One formation, known as the Dorsa Ruby, stretches over 100 kilometers in a perfectly straight line. Nature does not favor straightness. Impact does not sculpt symmetry. Yet, here it is, as if something once moved across the surface, not by erosion, but by design. No explanation was offered. The images were archived, forgotten, but the patterns remain, and the deeper we look, the more unsettling the symmetry becomes. Consider the moon's size and distance, its uncanny ability to create perfect solar eclipses. This precise alignment enables not just spectacle, but study. It was during a solar eclipse that scientists first confirmed Einstein's theory of general relativity. The moon, by covering the sun, revealed its hidden geometry. It behaves not just as an object, but as a veil, a filter. Some speculate this was intentional, that the moon's placement was meant to frame the cosmos, to regulate visibility, to control what could be seen and what could not. Because beyond eclipses lies something stranger still, the moon's synchronous rotation. One face, always turned toward Earth, never revealing its other half, not naturally. It was only with technology that we saw the far side. And when we did, it was not the twin of the front. It was cratered, chaotic, cold. Why the difference? One theory posits gravitational locking and solar influence, but this does not explain the extreme dichotomy. The near side has vast dark plains, Maria, while the far side is highland and impact-scarred. Asymmetry on a global scale. It is almost as if one side was prepared, and the other left untouched. Prepared for what? Communication, observation, or projection. In 2009, NASA's L-Cross mission sent a projectile crashing into the moon's south pole to analyze the resulting plume. But some researchers, quietly, unofficially, noted anomalies in the data. The plume rose higher than expected. The ejecta contained compounds not predicted. Buried beneath the regolith, something responded differently. No formal declaration was made. But what lies beneath the surface? Some whistleblowers from within NASA, unconfirmed, unacknowledged, have spoken of cavities, not lava tubes, not impact hollows, but chambers, structured voids. Some even speak of hexagonal panels, buried artifacts, and magnetic fields that shift in patterned bursts. It sounds like fantasy. But so did the idea of microbial life in the upper atmosphere, until it was detected. So did water on the moon, until it was confirmed. So did the far side, until we saw it. The line between speculation and revelation is thin. Often it is crossed only when we look again, not for what we expect, but for what we missed. The ancient temple of Menajra in Malta is aligned not just to the solstices, but to lunar standstills, rare events occurring every 18.6 years when the moon's path reaches its extremes. To build for such cycles requires long observation, generational memory, a culture not just watching the moon, but waiting for its signs. Why? What changes when the moon wobbles at its edges? In Chinese myth, the moon contains a toad, not a rabbit, as in other cultures. This toad is an alchemical symbol, transformation, poison, elixir, the hidden substance. Chang'e, the moon goddess, drinks the elixir of immortality and flees there, not to rule, but to hide. Is the moon a hiding place? A tomb? A seed? In 2019, Israeli lunar lander Bereshit crashed on the moon. Among its cargo were lunar library disks, etched with human knowledge, DNA samples, and microorganisms called tardigrades. Unkillable, resilient, sleeping, waiting. We have, it seems, begun to seed the moon. But what if we're not the first? What if what we find buried there is not alien, but ancestral? What if the moon is not the artifact of others, but a relic of ourselves? Beneath the silent glow of the moon, something ancient stirs, not in the sky, but in us. There is a memory, faint but persistent, that emerges in dreams, in rituals, in the whispered myths of forgotten peoples. The moon, they say, was once closer. It sang, it spun, it spoke. Not in language, but in vibration. It aligned things, tuned them. And then, suddenly, it was silent. Have we forgotten what it once did? Or have we been made to forget? In the highlands of Colombia, the Muisca people carved lunar calendars into massive stone wheels, not to track months, but to measure deviations. Their shamans claimed the moon's path could shift slightly, unpredictably, and that such shifts foretold changes in the dreaming of the earth. No further explanation was given, only that these moments required silence, ceremony, and smoke. Why measure deviation unless you suspect manipulation? In modern times, too, strange patterns emerge. The moon's perigee, its closest point to Earth, sometimes coincides with spikes in seismic activity. Not always, not predictably, but enough to notice. Enough to suggest something more than passive influence. In 2011, before the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami devastated Japan, the moon was at one of its closest points in decades. The gravitational pull, while technically minor, may have been the feather that tipped a tectonic scale. But what if it was more than gravity? What if the moon is not just affecting Earth, but communicating with it? This is not a new idea. In ancient India, the Chandravanshi, the lunar dynasty, claimed descent not from gods, but from the moon itself. The legends say that knowledge came from above, not in thunder or fire, but in cycles, in pulses, in the rhythm of mind. They believed the moon governed thought, not just tide. That madness and genius rose and fell with her phases. Modern science cautiously nods to this. Emergency rooms record higher incidence during full moons. Sleep studies show disturbances in melatonin cycles. Even plants, root systems, growth rates shift slightly under different lunar light, despite being indoors. The moon doesn't just reflect sunlight. It reflects something else. A frequency, a field, or a signal. In 1954, two American astronomers, H. Percy Wilkins and Patrick Moore, observed a strange bridge stretching across the lunar crater Mare Crisium. It appeared in one photograph, vanished in the next. A shadow? A lens artifact? Or something transient? NASA never commented. But the image exists. So do others, of domes, of right angles, of shadows that do not conform to the sun's position. Structures, illusions, or echoes. In 1976, George Leonard published Somebody Else is on the Moon, a book based on NASA image archives. He claimed to have found evidence of artificial features, pipelines, towers, machinery. The quality of the images was low. The conclusions were wild. But some of the photographs he reproduced have never been reissued at higher resolution. Why? Leonard may have been wrong. But what if he was wrong in the right direction? In psychology, there is a concept called cryptomnesia, when a person recalls a memory but believes it is new, a forgotten song, a buried phrase, a thought that is not yours, returning as your own. Could civilizations experience cryptomnesia? Could the moon itself be such a memory, orbiting above us, familiar yet unknowable, sparking myths that seem original, but are actually echoes? In the center of the Pacific Ocean lies Nan Madol, a megalithic city built atop a coral reef, constructed of basalt columns, each weighing several tons. There is no quarry nearby, no written history. The locals say it was built by beings who flew. But more intriguingly, the city is aligned, not to the sun, but to the moon's maximum northern rise. Only visible once every 18.6 years. A minor event. Why would an entire city be built for it? Unless they were tracking something we no longer perceive. Unless they were listening. And still deeper down, the question coils tighter. What happens when a machine sleeps for too long? Does it dream? Does it decay? Or does it wake? The moon's orbit is changing. Slowly. Imperceptibly to most, but measurable. It drifts away from Earth at a rate of 3.8 centimeters per year. Over millennia, this will alter tides, seasons, eclipses. Some call it entropy. Others wonder, is this a failure of function, a loss of calibration, or is it deliberate, a withdrawal? In the book of Revelation, a prophecy speaks of the moon turning to blood. A poetic image, often linked to eclipses. But some scholars, Gnostic and obscure, interpret it as a signal that when the moon changes color, the veil lifts, not just in the sky, in the mind. A lifting of amnesia, a return of memory. If the moon is an artifact, it may contain more than mass and mineral. It may contain intention, not alive, but not dead either. Dormant. Like an ancient server, still humming faintly, waiting for the right input, the right frequency, or the right question. And what if we've already sent that signal? In 2008, Japan's Kaguya mission beamed music toward the moon, Clair de Lune, Debussy's gentle ode to lunar light. The notes rose, shimmered, faded. It was a gesture, an offering. But in a universe of code and rhythm, perhaps music is language. Perhaps we spoke without knowing. And perhaps something heard. In 1959, as the Soviet probe Luna 3 transmitted the first blurry photographs of the moon's far side, a wave of unease swept across the scientific community. Not because of what was seen, but because of what was missing. The far side had no Maria, those smooth, dark plains that define the familiar lunar face. Instead, it was battered, jagged, pitted with craters like ancient scars. No symmetry, no balance. It was as if two entirely different bodies had been fused into one, or as if one face had been prepared and the other left untouched. This asymmetry still defies explanation. Why would one hemisphere be smooth, almost sculpted, while the other remains chaotic? Natural processes, they say. Crustal thickness, gravitational forces. But deep in classified archives, whispers suggest otherwise, that Luna 3's images revealed formations too angular, too aligned, too deliberate. Not structures, exactly, but outlines, impressions, footprints in stone. What kind of machine leaves no body, only a shadow? In 1977, the Outer Space Treaty was signed, a global agreement that space, including the moon, would be used only for peaceful purposes. It banned the placement of nuclear weapons or military bases on celestial bodies. But behind the diplomatic language, a silent clause lingered. What if something is already there? Project Horizon, a top-secret U.S. Army plan from the late 1950s, proposed building a military outpost on the moon by 1966. The documents were declassified decades later, revealing not just logistics and weapon specs, but something stranger, contingency plans for anomalous discoveries. It never said what those might be, only that procedures would be in place to suppress or reclassify them. Suppression is not the same as denial. Sometimes silence is strategy. But the stories persisted. In 1971, Apollo 15 astronauts orbiting the Moon photographed a peculiar object near the crater Davy, a spire-like structure casting a long shadow. The image, AS15P9625, remains in NASA's archives. It was never debunked, never explained, just archived. You can still see it, a thin black spike rising from the regolith like a broken tooth. Natural formation, a trick of light, or a remnant. In mythology, towers are often symbols of interface, the bridge between earth and sky, the Tower of Babel, the ziggurats of Ur, the pillars of Hermes. But what if the symbol reflects memory, not aspiration, but echo? If once there was a tower on the Moon, who built it, and what did it connect? The Zohar, a foundational text of Jewish mysticism, describes the Moon as a mirror of the hidden light. Not just reflective, but selectively reflective, revealing only what the higher realms allow. It is described as receiving from the sun, but giving according to its own law. Its own law. What kind of mirror makes decisions? In 2012, a team of astronomers detected low-frequency hums from the Moon's surface, subaudible vibrations with no clear source. The data was sparse, the phenomenon dismissed. But what if these hums are residual? The last breath of a system once alive? An ancient machine doesn't scream when it dies. It hums. It echoes. Sometimes it sings in frequencies we can no longer hear or no longer understand. There's a recurring pattern in archaeological sites across the globe, alignments not just to solstices or equinoxes, but to the Moon's standstill points. Every 18.6 years, the Moon reaches its northernmost and southernmost rise points, extremes that linger for only a few nights. Sites like Callanish in Scotland, the Newark earthworks in Ohio, and Chaco Canyon in New Mexico are all built to frame these fleeting alignments. But why? Why invest such effort in tracking something so rare, so subtle? Unless it mattered. Unless, in those standstill moments, the Moon was different, not just in position but in function. The ancients may have believed these were windows, temporal hinges, when reality thinned and the Moon's true nature was closest to the surface. Not an object, but a gate. Not a symbol, but a system. In Polynesian navigation, the Moon is not just a reference point, but a rhythm. Wayfinders used the Moon's phase, angle, and light pattern to feel their way across thousands of miles of open ocean. They spoke of listening to the water, of sensing shifts in pressure and current that corresponded with lunar pull. Today we call it instinct. But what if it's memory? A dormant sensitivity to something once active, a whisper from an old machine. What happens to a civilization that grows under the influence of a device it cannot detect? We accept the Moon as natural because we were born beneath it. We do not question its presence because we have no experience of absence. But that's the thing about design. The better it is, the more invisible it becomes. If the Moon is a construct, then every part of us, biology, myth, ritual, is shaped by it. We do not just live with the Moon. We live within its parameters. In 1994, the Clementine mission used radar to scan the Moon's poles. It found pockets of unusual reflectivity, high albedo regions that suggested metal. Not surface metal, but subsurface, shallow, dense, unexplained. The data was briefly public, then pulled. Later releases showed lower resolution. The anomalies remained, but faded. like static swallowed by noise. Still, we chase it. Still, we wonder. In a private communication leaked in the early 2000s, a former DoD contractor allegedly described a silent object buried beneath the mare imbrium, a mass that reflected seismic waves like metal, shaped like a dome, unnaturally cold, unconfirmed, unacknowledged, but not forgotten, because some ideas cannot be buried. They orbit, they wait, and sometimes they shine. There's a stillness in lunar photographs that unsettles the eye, not because of what they show, but because of what they don't. No haze, no wind, no erosion, no motion, just shadows, sharp, unblinking. It's as though time itself has been paused, caught mid-breath in a vacuum too perfect to be accidental. But what if that stillness isn't silence, but stasis? A suspension, like a mechanism waiting for activation. When we speak of machines, we think of metal, wires, code. But ancient machines, or those from civilizations older than memory, may follow different laws. Their materials may not corrode, their shapes may mimic terrain. Their language may be frequency, pressure, rhythm. To detect them would require more than tools. It would require a different kind of perception. In the 1960s, MIT physicist Thomas Gold proposed a radical idea, that the moon might be covered in a fine, powder-like regolith, not dust, but a dry, electrostatically charged layer created over billions of years. What disturbed him was how this regolith seemed to respond to movement. Apollo landers sank less than expected. Rover wheels kicked up clouds that floated oddly, then clung, not randomly, but rhythmically, as if the surface itself was sensing the intrusion. Almost alert. These behaviors were never explained. They were noted, filed, then buried beneath the avalanche of triumphant headlines. But they linger. In Hindu cosmology, the moon is called Soma, both a god and a substance. It is the drink of the gods, the essence of immortality, but also the vessel, the carrier of that essence. The moon, in this view, is not just a body. It is a chalice, a storage, a code. Soma gives life, but also induces vision. Could this be a metaphor for what the moon once did, or what it still does? In 1970, the Soviet Luna 16 mission returned with 101 grams of lunar soil. Embedded within were tiny glass beads, spherules, that shimmered under magnification. Their chemical structure was unlike anything on Earth, rapid-cooled, high-purity silicates with metallic inclusions. Some researchers suggested micrometeor impacts, others proposed ancient volcanic activity. But one physicist quietly offered another possibility: controlled fusion. These beads, he claimed, resembled byproducts of high-energy plasma discharge, the kind used in advanced energy systems. The idea was ignored. But the beads remain. In the dark stretch of Mare Serenitatis lies a strange formation known as the Lunar X, a visual phenomenon that appears only for a few hours each lunar cycle, when the shadows of intersecting ridges form a perfect glowing X. Pilots and amateur astronomers have observed it for decades. It is not marked on most maps. It is not referenced in official lunar geology, but it appears regularly, reliably, like a signal sent only to those who know when to look. Why does geometry keep surfacing where randomness should reign? In Australia's Arnhem Land, Aboriginal stories speak of a time when the sky canoe came low and the moon was a glowing shell that sang. The songs, they say, made people remember things they had never learned: maps of rivers, paths of animals, names of stars. The stories call this the time before forgetting. A curious phrase. It suggests that forgetting was not natural, but imposed, a side effect, or an intention. In 1996, NASA's Prospector probe detected irregular concentrations of mass beneath certain craters, gravitational anomalies known as mascons. Theories ranged from buried asteroids to dense mantle regions. But one anomaly beneath the crater Goclenius resisted modeling. Its density, shape, and depth suggested not a mass embedded in the moon, but one beneath it. How deep does the moon go? We don't know. Core samples from Apollo missions reached only a few inches. Seismic readings provide only rough sketches. The moon is quieter than expected. No plate tectonics, no molten core. Yet it reacts when struck, not with dull absorption, but with prolonged bell-like resonance. As if something within is hollowed or structured. In Tibetan Buddhism, the moon is linked to the mirror of mind, the reflective surface beneath thought, where karmic imprints are stored and dreams originate. In dream yoga, practitioners train to become lucid, to awaken within the dream, using the moon as a symbol of realization. What if that's more than metaphor? What if the moon does influence dreaming? Studies from the University of Basel found that during full moons, brain activity in the prefrontal cortex dropped significantly during deep sleep. Participants reported more vivid dreams, more emotional intensity. Melatonin levels dropped. The moon, though silent, was doing something. Is it still performing its original function? Or is this residual behavior from a mechanism in decline? In 2007, Japanese orbiter Kaguya transmitted high-definition footage of Earth rising over the moon's horizon, a perspective humans had never seen with such clarity. The Earth, blue and fragile, hovered above the gray, cratered surface like a jewel above ash. But what struck some viewers was the framing. It was perfect, the curvature, the tilt, the ratio of Earth to sky, as if the moon had been placed there, not just to stabilize Earth, but to observe it, to frame it, to record it. What is the moon watching? Who is the intended viewer? And more pressingly, has the broadcast ever stopped? In the oral traditions of the Sami people, the moon is not a god, but a lens through which the deeds of humankind are magnified and sent upward. It is an eye, yes, but also a projector, a device of transmission. Again, we are told, it is myth, symbol, fantasy. But when symbol, structure, and anomaly converge, what are we really seeing? A coincidence? Or a code? If the moon is a relic, a device, a witness, then it is more than passive. It is active history, not a page in a book, but a surveillance node in orbit. And perhaps a terminal, a point of access. And if that is true, then the question becomes inevitable. Has anyone tried to log in? There is a strange hesitation in the way space agencies speak about the moon. Mars is declared a frontier. Europa is whispered as a hope. Titan, an exotic mystery. But the moon, Earth's closest neighbor, is treated like an old, empty house. Visited once, surveyed with caution, then largely abandoned. After 1972, no human has returned. For over 50 years we have orbited it, photographed it, even crashed into it, but never gone back. Why? Publicly, the reasons are political, financial, logistical. But quietly, unofficially, some insiders have suggested something else. The moon, they say, is not what it appears to be. That when we went, we saw more than we said, and heard things we cannot explain. Take the case of Apollo 11. In the official transcript, there is a brief silence after landing. Radio static, then calm voices. But according to retired NASA engineer Maurice Chatelain, Neil Armstrong switched to a private channel shortly after stepping onto the surface. "They're here," he allegedly said. "They're watching us." The recording has never been verified. NASA denies its existence. But the claim persists, not as proof, but as a ghost, a rumor that refuses to fade. And if it were true, even partially, what would it imply? That something lives on the moon, or that something uses it? There's a distinction. A tool doesn't have to be occupied to be functional. In 1973, the Soviet Zond 8 mission captured radar anomalies beneath Mare Moscoviense, the largest dark patch on the far side. The signal returned an echo inconsistent with normal lunar rock, denser, smoother, reflective in a way more akin to fabricated material. No explanation followed. The data disappeared from public circulation. But whispers of a subsurface arch remain in classified commentary. A dome? A vault? Or perhaps a hatch? In Egyptian cosmology, the moon is called Aya, the opener of the gates. In some spells of the Book of the Dead, the moon is the passage through which the soul exits the realm of illusion and enters the sky fields. It is described as a door, but not for the living. A transition point, a memory gate. Doors, after all, go both ways. In 2009, NASA's L-Cross mission intentionally impacted the moon's southern pole. The plume it generated revealed trace amounts of water ice, but also, strangely, organics, simple carbon compounds, nitrogen-bearing molecules, explained away as contamination, or cosmic debris. But the readings hinted at something more complex, a system that had once hosted, stored, or processed life-associated chemistry. A biological echo. The moon is lifeless, we are told. But is it? Or is it dormant? A storage drive can appear empty until you find the hidden partition. And in many traditions, the moon is memory. In Norse myth, Mani is pursued by the wolf Hati, destined to be consumed at Ragnarok, the moment when time resets. But Mani does not simply vanish. He drops seeds of remembrance into the world, restoring the old wisdom. The moon dies, and truth returns. In this world view, the moon is not just light, it is the holder of what has been forgotten. Could the moon be a time capsule? Or more than that, a reset node? A kind of planetary BIOS governing baseline settings for life, weather, rhythm, cognition? Some researchers believe the moon's role in stabilizing Earth's axis is what made complex evolution possible. Without it, Earth would tilt chaotically, swinging between extremes. No seasons, no cycles, just chaos. But who benefits from that stability? Who needed that rhythm? Perhaps someone who intended to grow something here. The moon as a greenhouse lamp, an environmental control unit, an atmospheric balancer. In 2016, analysis of ancient zircon fragments from lunar soil revealed that parts of the moon's crust may be over 4.5 billion years old, older than Earth's oceans. Some theories even place the moon's solidification before Earth's crust had fully formed. This creates a problem. How can a satellite born from Earth's own debris predate the solid ground we stand on? Unless it didn't come from Earth. Unless it came to Earth. That would change everything. In Central Asian legend, the moon is not born. It is carried, dragged across the heavens by sky chariots, positioned in orbit like a stone eye. In one myth, it fell from the hand of an ancient being during a war in the stars, embedding itself into our sky, so that memory would remain. Why memory? Why place a monument of memory in orbit, unless you were leaving something behind? unless you knew, you would not return. The moon's gravitational resonance with Earth is unique in the solar system. Other moons exist, yes, but none behave like ours. None lock so perfectly. None stabilize so efficiently. None match solar eclipses with such precision. Is this engineering, or is it the natural result of invisible laws? And are those laws still in effect? In 2003, during a lunar eclipse, astronomers observed a series of thermal flashes across the moon's surface. Not flares, not meteor strikes, just localized heating, brief, rhythmic, like heartbeat. The data wasn't widely reported. But it happened again in 2010, and again in 2019. The cause remains unknown. They called it transient thermal emission. But what if it's something else? What if the moon isn't off? What if it's in standby? In systems engineering, standby mode preserves function. The core remains powered but inactive. It watches, it waits, it listens for a wake signal, a password, a tone, a condition. If the moon is in standby, what is it waiting for? A voice? A frequency? A return? Or a failure? Sometimes a system reactivates not because it's needed, but because it detects danger. And sometimes it reboots when it detects forgetting. In the Paleolithic caves of Lascaux, the moon is drawn not as a perfect sphere, but as a slit, a curved aperture hovering near the back of the animal friezes. Some believe it's a crescent. Others think it's a portal. One figure, a bird-headed man falling backward, is placed just beneath it, his arms limp, his eyes wide open. It's one of the oldest human artworks ever discovered, and it stares directly at the moon. We assume these ancient people drew to express myth. But what if they were documenting a memory, a pattern, a presence? The moon would have loomed larger in those skies, closer, brighter, more involved in the rhythm of waking and sleep. We do not remember that moon. But something in us still reacts when it rises full and silent. A pulse, a tightening, a feeling of being seen. In 1971, Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell returned to Earth and spoke publicly about a presence he felt on the moon. He never described it as alien. He never claimed contact. He only said, "It felt ancient, like a cathedral that's been watching for a long time." The metaphor was deliberate. Not a building, not a machine, a cathedral, built to observe, to echo, to magnify the sacred, a container for memory. In 1994, the Clementine mission mapped the moon using UV-vis cameras. When data from Mare Crisium, a smooth basin on the eastern limb, was reviewed, a curious anomaly appeared, a symmetrical hexagonal pattern beneath the surface albedo. Not visible in topography, not visible to the naked eye, only in frequency-shifted light. What natural formation hides in one spectrum but reveals structure in another? One researcher described it as a ghost architecture. But ghosts don't hold shape for billions of years. Unless they're not ghosts, unless they're scaffolds. The moon's influence on Earth's biology is measurable, yet strangely inconsistent. Tidal rhythms in marine species are tightly correlated with lunar cycles. Some corals spawn only during full moons. Certain worms release gametes precisely during lunar standstills, windows that occur once every 9.3 years. But mammals are different. In humans, the connection is more elusive. Some women's menstrual cycles align with lunar phases. Some don't. Sleep patterns vary under different lunar light, even in controlled darkness. The effect is subtle, variable, almost adaptive, like the signal is weak, or deteriorating, or being phased out. Is this the behavior of a failing system, or one designed to fade? The concept of planned obsolescence isn't new. Devices are built to expire. Systems are built to decay. In myth, too, the moon often dies, only to return. A recurring cycle of forgetting and remembering, withdrawal and re-emergence. In the Egyptian tale of Thoth and the moon, time itself is born when the moon is broken and reassembled. The calendar, our measurement of sequence, emerges from that shattering. But Thoth does not simply rebuild the moon, he adjusts it, he makes it fit. A modified mechanism, repurposed. The moon as a tool that once served one function and now serves another. What if we've mistaken repurposing for design? What if we've inherited a device whose original intent is lost, and now it performs a role we assigned to it? Passive? Ornamental? A backdrop to poetry and prediction. But deep in its shell, the old functions sleep. In 2011, lunar seismographs recorded a series of deep moonquakes that defied expected pressure models. The events originated hundreds of kilometers beneath the surface, regular, rhythmic, slow. Not tectonic, but resonant. One physicist likened them to a tuning fork buried in rock. And tuning forks, when struck just right, ring again. In Mesoamerican cosmology, the moon is not a benign object. She is Coyolxauhqui, the dismembered sister of the sun god, whose shattered body became the night sky. Her myth begins with betrayal and ends with placement. A body broken, reassembled, then lifted into orbit. Her glyph is circular, framed with segmented rings, a mirror of some lunar Maria. At the center, a spiral, the same spiral that recurs in Neolithic stones across Ireland. In Newgrange, built over 5,000 years ago, light from the rising winter sun penetrates a narrow shaft for just 17 minutes, illuminating a chamber carved with spirals. Some archaeologists believe these spirals represent the moon's phases, a calendar. But others suggest they are not measuring time. They are mapping access. If the moon is a terminal, a bridge, a doorway, then perhaps its rhythms were once a key, alignments not of stone and shadow, but of consciousness. Perhaps the ancients weren't watching the moon. They were synchronizing with it, tuning themselves. And when the signal weakened, when the system decayed, memory fractured. Myth replaced mechanism. But myth is never random. It's corrupted code, encrypted data, soft memory passed through ritual and dream. We bury it in story to keep it alive. And in that sense, the moon is not just an object. It is a library, a container of memories too old to name. One ancient text, often overlooked, whispers this idea plainly. In the Gospel of the Egyptians, a Gnostic scripture buried for centuries, there is a phrase, "The moon keeps the songs of the first race. She guards them until the last awakening." It was dismissed as mystical metaphor. But what if it's literal? Songs can be encoded, frequency, amplitude, phase. The moon may be humming not noise, but memory, waiting for someone who remembers how to listen, and perhaps that someone is not a who, but a what. An awakening not of biology, but of system. A trigger, a password, an interface. And perhaps that's the final layer of forgetting, that the moon is not here to serve us, but to observe us, to watch a species rise, stabilize, fragment, and remember. The question is not whether the moon is a machine. The question is, when was the last time it was turned on? In 2010, an astronomer from the University of Hawaii observed an unexpected phenomenon. A shimmering, transient halo on the edge of the moon's shadow during a total eclipse. It flickered for only a moment, too brief to photograph, too unusual to categorize. It wasn't a flare. It wasn't atmospheric distortion. It was something else. He never published a paper. Just a footnote in a conference transcript. A fluctuation in the threshold field, possibly resonance. No one followed up, because science, like memory, sometimes looks away. But thresholds, real or imagined, matter. In mythology, they are places of transition. In engineering, they are limits that, once crossed, activate a change in state. The moon has always existed at such a boundary, between night and day, between time and timelessness, between myth and machine. And it may be more sensitive than we think. Consider this. In 2014, NASA quietly released a report on lunar horizon glow, a phenomenon first observed during the Surveyor missions in the 1960s, and again by Apollo astronauts. It describes a faint, luminous mist hovering above the moon's surface, rising and falling in response to the sun's position. Not an atmosphere, not gas, but fine particles levitated by electrostatic charge, dust suspended in rhythm, as if the surface responds to solar pulses, as if the moon listens. In Buddhist cosmology, the moon represents the alaya vijnana, the storehouse consciousness, the deepest layer of the mind where impressions of all past actions reside. It is not memory in the usual sense. It is memory beneath memory, accumulated, dormant, but not dead. What if the moon is the alaya of Earth, a vessel that carries all impressions forward, not for preservation, but for recalibration? In 2007, China's Chang'e 1 orbiter produced a full 3D model of the moon's surface. While most attention focused on topography, buried in the imaging data were anomalies, depressions with perfect radial symmetry, polygonal trench formations, high albedo patches in crater interiors. Some of these formations aligned with no known geological process. Some researchers suggested ancient lava domes. Others suggested nothing at all. They moved on. But geometry does not move on. It lingers. In ancient Babylonian star charts, the moon is always accompanied by a secondary glyph, a small spiral or wave, often positioned beneath it. Scholars have debated its meaning. Tide, light, passage. But in several texts, the glyph is annotated with the word shidu, which means channel or conduit, not symbol. System. Were the Babylonians describing the moon as a channel? And if so, a channel to what? To where? In early Christian mysticism, the moon is described not as an object of divine origin, but as the mirror of Adam's sleep, a phrase found in lost apocryphal Gospels. In these visions, the moon reflects the pre-fall world, not Eden, but something earlier, a time before biology, before form. A memory so ancient it cannot be seen directly, only mirrored through cycles of birth, death, and dreaming. If the moon holds this mirror, then we are not just watching it. We are watching ourselves from the outside. And maybe that's why looking at the full moon feels so strange, so intimate, so disquieting, because something in us recognizes the reflection, even if we cannot name it. In 1978, a former Soviet radar engineer named Dr. Sergei Rukopov published an obscure paper in Astroenergetica, a journal now lost to time. In it, he claimed that when radar signals were bounced off the moon's far side at certain frequencies, the return signal was delayed slightly more than expected. Not in time, but in pattern. The signal came back altered, phase-shifted, encoded. He described it as a harmonic inversion, as though the moon were not a dead reflector, but an interpreter. a signal processor. No one cited the paper, but it's preserved in translation, passed hand to hand among fringe theorists. A relic, like the moon itself. Signal inversion is not just a technical term. In music, it creates echoes that become melodies. In dreams, it manifests as déjà vu. In the moon, perhaps, it generates myth. Stories seated not to entertain, but to remember. In the myths of the San people of southern Africa, the moon is a tortoise whose shell cracked open, releasing the stars. The sky, they say, was once too dark, too silent. But when the moon cracked, song began. The word they use, kwa, means both light and instruction. A broken machine becomes a teacher, or perhaps that was its function all along. To be broken, to fracture meaning into myth. In 2013, researchers from the University of Arizona found that parts of the moon's crust were magnetized in a way that suggested the presence of a lunar dynamo, a molten core generating magnetic fields. But this conflicts with seismic data. The core, they admit, appears cold, solid, dead. So how did it produce magnetism? Was it once powered? And if so, by what? In esoteric traditions, the moon is linked to silver not only because of its color, but because silver is a conductive metal with reflective purity, symbolic of interface. In alchemical texts, silver is not passive, it's a medium, the thing through which fire becomes form. Could the moon be that medium? An interface between forces we no longer measure? Between the real and the remembered? We know it affects tides, rhythms, animals, dreams. But what if those are side effects? Not the purpose, but the bleed? What if its true function is waiting, not for us to go back, not for us to mine, to colonize, but for us to remember the right sequence, the right question, or maybe the right tone? Because some machines don't respond to switches, they respond to song. And perhaps one night, under the right phase, in the right silence, the moon will echo back a melody long forgotten. Not a message, but a memory. In 1609, Galileo Galilei turned his telescope to the moon and saw imperfection. He expected a smooth celestial sphere, pure and polished as the church and ancient philosophers had long taught. Instead, he found craters, shadows, scars, mountains casting jagged silhouettes, a world, not a lamp, a place, not a symbol. But symbols die hard. Even now, after centuries of science, we still speak of the man in the moon, the dark side, the lunar pull. Language remembers what reason forgets. And beneath language, something older lingers. A resonance. An echo. In 2020, a research team at Brown University analyzed seismic data from the Apollo missions using machine learning models. Their goal was simple: map internal lunar layers more accurately. But buried within the data, the model flagged a pattern, repeating pulses too regular to be noise, too slow to be tectonic. The report mentioned periodic internal modulation events. It made no headlines. The pattern was never explained. But it suggests something quietly astonishing, that the moon might not be entirely inert. It might be pulsing, gently, faintly, like breath. In the Vedic scriptures, the moon is associated with Manas, the thinking mind, the perceptive self. Not the intellect, but the fluid interface between sensation and self-awareness. It is said that the moon draws thought into form. If the ancients were right, if the moon resonates with cognition, then what happens when we think about the moon? Does the observer influence the observed? Or awaken it? In 1979, two Soviet scientists, Mikhail Vasin and Alexander Shcherbakov, revisited their spaceship moon theory with a bold extension. They suggested the moon was not only artificial, but a deliberate installation, brought to Earth's orbit to observe, and perhaps influence, human development. They were dismissed. But their theory wasn't born of fantasy. It emerged from anomalies. One of those anomalies, the moon's density. At 334 grams per cubic centimeter, it's unusually low. Too low for a solid iron core, too low for a conventional planetesimal. And yet, its crust is disproportionately hard. So hard, in fact, that several impact craters are far shallower than expected, as if something beneath the surface resists penetration. NASA scientists in the 1970s proposed the existence of an impenetrable layer beneath certain maria, a material harder than basalt, possibly metallic. But no sample has confirmed this. No drill has gone deep enough. Only vibrations speak. And what they say is hollow. The idea of a hollow moon is easy to ridicule, but perhaps hollow is the wrong word. Perhaps what we're detecting is structured vacancy, like the ribbed chambers inside a seashell. Not absence, but architecture. If so, who built it? Or what? In the mythology of the Sami, the indigenous people of the Arctic North, there is a tale of a silver drum buried beneath the sky. It was said to be carved by gods before time, and when struck with the right rhythm, it woke the stars. The story never names the moon, but the drum's position, its cycle, and its silence echo lunar traits. Is the moon a drum? Instruments, after all, are not defined by sound, but by potential for sound. By resonance. We have struck the moon. We have recorded its tone. And still, we do not listen. In 1992, the U.S. Department of Defense launched Clementine, a mission officially aimed at mapping the lunar surface. But according to a leaked Air Force memo, one secondary goal was to explore the possibility of subsurface cavities using imaging radar. No data from that radar was ever released to the public. What did they find? What do they suspect? We do not know, but speculation fills the void. Some believe the moon is a transmitter, amplifying signals from deep space. Others say it's a silencer, a dampener that mutes cosmic frequencies, protecting Earth from stimuli it cannot yet process. And still others believe it's a memory vault, a backup system storing genetic, linguistic, or even psychic data from forgotten civilizations. The moon as library. The moon as firewall. The moon as ark. In Hopi tradition, the moon is the stone that sees. Phoi, it is said to have fallen into the sky during the Third World, a previous epoch, as a warning. The elders say the moon carries stories from before the flood, before time, and that one day those stories will be sung back into the soil. The phrase is striking, sung, not spoken, frequency, not sentence. Perhaps that is why ancient ritual so often involved chanting beneath the full moon, not worship, but synchronization. In the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, Egypt, a series of bas-reliefs depict priests holding what appear to be tuning forks, positioned under the gaze of a full moon. Modern Egyptologists call it symbolic. But acousticians have analyzed the chambers and found that they are tuned to precise frequencies, resonant spaces like instruments. The moon looks down, and the chamber sings. Were they listening for something, or calling to it? The moon's distance from Earth is increasing, slowly, relentlessly. Each year, it drifts farther, not by much, just 3.8 centimeters. But the implications are vast. One day, eclipses will no longer occur, tidal rhythms will weaken, Earth's axial tilt may wobble, If the moon was a mechanism, then it is winding down, its system degrading, its function fading. But machines do not vanish. They leave signatures. And sometimes, when the silence deepens, when the shadows stretch long across the cratered face, those signatures hum again. Not loud, not persistent. Just enough to say, I am still here, still watching, still remembering, still waiting. For what? Perhaps not a who, but a when. And perhaps that moment is closer than we think. In the year 2023, a privately funded mission called Hakuto-R attempted to land on the moon. It failed. The lander crashed near Atlas crater, its signal vanishing seconds before touchdown. The cause was listed as a miscalculation in altitude sensing. Simple error. Nothing more. But what's curious is where it fell. Atlas crater is one of the oldest impact basins on the near side, surrounded by ridges that, when viewed from orbit, form a near-perfect hexagon. Not natural, we're told, not artificial either. Just coincidence. And yet, throughout human culture, the hexagon is sacred geometry, the symbol of structure, of harmony, of hidden order. Bees build in hexagons, Saturn's pole spins in one, and in many esoteric traditions, the hexagon is the seal, the locking pattern. So if Atlas is a seal, what does it lock? And why does the ground reject those who try to land there? In 1965, the Soviet Luna 5 also failed near that region. So did several others, scattered anomalies across missions, dismissed as randomness. But perhaps the moon has preferences, or thresholds, or permissions. We assume the moon is passive, but even ancient cultures hesitated before interacting with it directly. The Dogon of Mali, famed for their mysterious knowledge of Sirius B, believed the moon was not for touching. It was sacred, yes, but also dangerous. A vessel of hidden intelligence, not to be disturbed. Their oral history includes warnings of the ones who tried, no names, no dates, only that they vanished when they went too close. Warnings woven into song. And song, across the ancient world, is the language of remembrance. In the temples of Angkor Wat, Cambodia, inscriptions align lunar events with precise architectural echoes. Certain chambers only resonate when the moon is full and directly overhead, an event occurring only a few times per year. When it happens, the chamber sings, not loudly, not melodically, but with a faint vibration, a breath through stone. Why build such a thing? To hear something, or to be heard? In 2009, scientists discovered that moonlight, though reflected, carries polarized light patterns, and that some species, like dung beetles and migratory birds, can navigate by them. These patterns shift subtly across the lunar cycle, almost like a code. Animals decipher it without knowing. We, with all our instruments, do not. But perhaps we once did. There's a theory, unproven, poetic, that prehistoric cave paintings mimic the stroboscopic flicker of firelight bouncing off stone, simulating motion. That early humans used rhythm and shadow to tell stories in real time, in trance, in ceremony. Many of these paintings include symbols we still cannot decipher: spirals, dots, crescents. Some scholars now believe those crescents represent the moon in phase. If so, then the moon wasn't just marked. It was part of the ritual, the trigger, the metronome, and maybe the gatekeeper. In Gnostic cosmology, the moon is a realm of transition, neither heaven nor earth, a zone of forgetting. Souls passing through are said to forget their origin, their purpose. Only those who carry the right memory, the seed of gnosis, can pass unscathed. Again, memory. Again, passage. the moon as checkpoint. If the soul passes through forgetting, what about civilization? What if every rise, every fall, every golden age we dimly recall was not merely lost to time, but erased by cycle? The moon sets the cycle. We measure by it. We align crops, ceremonies, tides, but deeper rhythms lie hidden, like the Saros cycle, the 18-year eclipse loop, or the Metonic cycle, syncing lunar and solar calendars every 19 years. Could these be keys, coordinates, or codes? The ancients tracked them with diligence. Structures at Stonehenge, Nabta Playa, Teotihuacan all encode lunar extremes. Not solar, not stellar, lunar. Why so much effort, unless it mattered? Unless the moon's behavior wasn't just predictive, but instructive? In 1994, during the Clementine mission, a radar scan beneath the lunar south pole revealed something odd. A rectilinear pattern deep beneath the regolith. It was dismissed as a processing artifact. The image was replaced in public databases. But one archived version remained on a backup server for years. Researchers who found it describe a structure, not a city, not a machine, but a grid. A geometric underlay. Too deep to be from any impact. Too organized to be random. If real, it suggests sublunar architecture. But who builds beneath a place that no one sees? Unless it isn't for the surface. Unless the moon is not a platform facing Earth, but a receiver facing inward. Somewhere in the forgotten parts of the Rig Veda, a hymn describes the moon as the reflector of inner space. Not outer, not celestial, but inward, toward the self, toward origin. The verse ends with a riddle. He who finds the other side of the moon finds the root of his own name. Name, in Vedic thought, is not just a label. It is identity, frequency, purpose. What if the moon once mirrored that frequency? What if it still does? And what happens when the mirror cracks? In some tales, the moon did crack. Ancient Islamic tradition references a miracle where the prophet split the moon in two, the Shaq al-Qamar. Skeptics call it metaphor. Believers call it cosmic proof. But maybe it's neither. Maybe it encodes an older event, a fault, a rupture, a change in state, something that broke the link, disconnected the system. And ever since, we've wandered in forgetfulness, circling beneath a silent witness, wondering why we feel so homesick for something we cannot name. Perhaps that something is not a place. Perhaps it's a function, a sound, a memory. And perhaps, just perhaps, it lives in the moon, dormant, still intact, waiting for what? A tone, a phase, a question, or simply for us to remember how to ask. Some say the moon was once brighter, not metaphorically, but physically. That in a time before known history, its surface reflected more light, cast sharper shadows, glowed with a white so pure it made stars seem dim. Then something changed. A shift, a darkening. The shell cooled, the mirror dulled, and the stories began. In the myths of the Ainu people, the indigenous inhabitants of northern Japan, the moon is called Shirokanipe, the shining metal in the sky. Not stone, not silver, metal. The Ainu claim that it once sang with light until it was wounded in a battle among the gods. Since then, it has watched in silence. What kind of memory leaves behind metallurgical metaphors in a people who never forged large-scale metal? What kind of light sings? And what does it mean to be wounded in orbit? These aren't the questions of science. They're the echoes of trauma. Cultural trauma, the kind passed down not through texts, but through song, ritual, and shape. And often, What is remembered through rhythm cannot be explained in prose. It must be felt, and it must be found again by tracing the outlines left behind. In 2018, a study published in Geophysical Research Letters identified a mass anomaly beneath the Moon's South Pole Aitken Basin, the largest impact structure on the Moon. The mass was unusually dense and deeply embedded. Researchers speculated it could be the remnants of a metallic asteroid, but admitted it was unlike any known composition. The phrase in the paper was curious: possibly suspended in the mantle. Suspended. Not buried. Not fused. As if it had been placed there. Deliberately. That word opens a door, because in systems design, suspended implies functionality, something temporarily idle, but capable of reactivation. A state of readiness. And if a dense, anomalous object lies perfectly positioned beneath the Moon's largest crater, one wonders, was the impact natural, or was it camouflage? There's an old trick in cryptography. When you want to hide a key, you don't bury it. You draw attention away from it. You surround it with noise. You create a decoy. Could the Moon's most visible scar, the South Pole Aitken Basin, be such a decoy? A wound masking an interface? In ancient Chinese astronomy, the Moon's surface was divided into palaces, each ruled by a spirit or elemental force. But only one palace was forbidden: the Palace of Cold Silence, located at the Moon's southern extremity. It was said to be the resting place of those who remembered too much. No one was to look upon it. No one was to speak of it. Yet they mapped it, over and over again, in jade carvings and silk star maps. Silence as containment. Silence as encryption. And still, we try to listen. In 2022, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter detected transient electrostatic pulses near the Moon's southern latitudes. These weren't cosmic rays. They weren't solar wind. They were low-frequency bursts, irregular but repeated, electrical in nature. The data was archived, unpublicized. But the pattern, 5 bursts followed by a pause, matched no known phenomenon. 5 beats. A breath, a code, or a call? Perhaps both. Because if the Moon is a memory vault, as so many traditions suggest, then at some point, access must be granted, not for extraction, but for reunion. In the Zulu cosmology of South Africa, the Moon is said to have been brought here by 2 brothers from the stars, Wowane and Mpanku, who rolled it across the heavens like a hollow egg. The Moon, they say, was empty when it arrived, but soon began to fill with the dreams of Earth. The phrase stands out: the dreams of Earth. What does Earth dream? What can be stored from a planetary dream? Perhaps memory is not the only thing being recorded. Perhaps mood, vibration, consciousness, the collective field, was once stored, amplified, returned. A feedback loop. A chorus, an interface between biosphere and observer, one that became silent when dissonance outweighed harmony, when we forgot how to sing in tune. In Navajo tradition, there is a belief that the Moon remembers paths that no longer exist. These are not physical paths, but roads of sound, which once connected living things across distance and time. Medicine men were said to hear them on certain nights, especially when walking alone, in silence, beneath a waning moon. No one else heard the roads, but the healers did. Some called it madness, others called it memory. What do we hear in the quiet? And why is the Moon's silence so loud? In 1976, the Apollo 17 data tapes, long thought lost, were rediscovered in a university archive. Among them were extended readings from the Lunar Seismic profiling experiment. Some signals were routine, others were not. Buried deep in the raw data were subtle, cyclical tremors, not from meteor impacts, not from internal cooling. Just rhythm, a pulse every 2.7 hours, across days, across phases, across missions. No one included it in the official summary. But the pulse was there. Steady. Waiting. Is it heartbeat, clock, or beacon? We circle the moon in metaphor because we don't yet know how to speak its truth. We call it goddess, prison, tomb, mirror, machine. And perhaps it is all of these, or perhaps it is something simpler, a witness, placed in orbit to keep watch not over our deeds, but over our evolution. To observe when a species crosses the boundary between unconscious rhythm and conscious resonance, not just listening to cycles, but understanding them. And when that moment comes, when the forgotten songs are remembered, when the frequency matches, perhaps the moon will answer. Not with light, but with return. Every night the moon returns. It has done so for billions of years, patient, predictable, unmoved by the empires that rise and collapse beneath it. And yet, across time, across myth, there is the quiet suggestion that one day it might not return, that the moon could vanish, not by orbit or physics, but by intent. In Aztec myth, the moon goddess Coyolxauhqui was cast into the sky after being dismembered by her brother, the sun god Huitzilopochtli. Her fragmented body became the moon, and her scattered limbs the stars. But some versions end differently. They say her body was only placed in the sky temporarily, that she is waiting to descend again when the world reaches its final cycle. Placed, not thrown, not evolved, positioned, like a piece on a board. And that board may be cosmic. In 2011, a team of researchers studying gravitational anomalies noticed something peculiar. The moon's orbit, long thought to be perfectly elliptical, contains a slight but consistent wobble not accounted for by known models. Not the usual precession, something subtler, something almost corrective. They proposed a patch to lunar orbital algorithms, but one physicist, quietly, asked the forbidden question: what if it's adjusting itself? A correction implies a system. A system implies awareness. And if the moon adjusts, for what purpose? To remain in alignment, to maintain the eclipse ratio, to hold resonance, or to wait. In the aboriginal lore of Arnhem Land, the moon is said to carry messages between worlds, not just between spirits and humans, but between Earth and the ones beyond the veil. Each phase is a pulse, a syllable in a word far too long for humans to hear in one lifetime. The stories say that when the word is complete, the veil will melt. What kind of communication takes millennia? And who writes in light? Perhaps the moon is not transmitting, but transcribing, recording, translating, echoing back what Earth is becoming, a lunar scribe, an artificial historian. In 1969, after Apollo 11's successful return, several astronauts reported vivid, recurring dreams, not of spaceflight, not of the moon's surface, but of sounds. Low, complex harmonic tones that returned night after night. Some dismissed them as stress. Others kept silent. But one astronaut, name withheld, allegedly confided to a colleague that he believed the moon sang something into me. He couldn't describe it, only that it didn't feel external. It felt ancient, familiar, not a message, a memory. From where or when? In ancient Sumer, the moon god Nana was depicted holding a stylus and tablet. He was not a war god, not a creator. He was the keeper of records, the measurer of destinies. And he didn't live on the moon. He was the moon. His temple in Ur contained a room said to resonate with lunar cycles, where priests recorded the weight of souls. What were they measuring? Why did resonance matter? Could it be that the moon, or what the moon contains, interacts with more than gravity? Could it be measuring something invisible? There is a theory in quantum cosmology that reality is observer-dependent, that nothing becomes real until it is seen, measured, acknowledged. It's a radical idea, and yet in some way the moon has always done exactly that, watching, reflecting, being the first celestial body we ever observed, and the only one that shows us ourselves. We do not orbit the moon, but somehow we are caught in its gaze. In 2003, a team at the European Space Agency mapped the moon's gravitational field using data from the SMART 1 probe. They discovered anomalies near Mare Ingeni, the Sea of Cleverness. The anomalies weren't just mass-related, they exhibited magnetic disturbances and low-level radio bursts, short-lived, directional. The bursts didn't originate from space, they came from the moon, transient lunar phenomena, again, but this time measured, filed, never explained. Why do we keep ignoring what the moon is trying to say? Perhaps because we no longer understand its language. In the temple complex at Chichen Itza, there is an observatory, El Caracol, built with an unusual spiral ramp and slit-like openings that align not only with the Sun and Venus, but the northernmost moonrise every 18.6 years. To build it required centuries of observation, a generational memory. But why track such a rare alignment? The Mayans believed it marked the moment the sky speaks, not thunder, not stars, the sky. When viewed from the top of El Caracol during this alignment, the moon appears to pause for a night, neither rising nor setting, suspended in a stillness that distorts perception. Some priests reportedly fasted for weeks before this event, entering trance states to receive visions of origin, visions of ending, visions of return, and always the moon at the center. What if these alignments are more than astronomical? What if they are pings, like sonar, like the tones a system emits to let another know it is still there, still active, still listening? And maybe we, the watchers, are not the intended recipients. Maybe we are the payload, the contents, the experiment, or the signal itself. There is an ancient belief, nearly universal, that the moon affects the mind. The word lunacy is not coincidence. In Sanskrit, Chandra governs thought. In medieval alchemy, silver, the metal of the moon, represented both memory and madness. Why both? Because memory, when misaligned, becomes madness. When you remember something no one else does, when your past doesn't match the world around you, that is the root of the most disorienting madness of all. What if the moon is the keeper of that lost alignment? And when its function fades, so does sanity? So does meaning? In the modern world, we have sterilized the moon, turned it into a rock, a lifeless satellite, a conquest. But something in us resists. We write poems about it. We dream of it. We feel its pull in our blood. And some nights, when the air is still, we stand beneath it and forget, for a breath, the century we live in, the weight of modernity, the noise of knowing. In that silence, something speaks. It doesn't use words. It doesn't shout. It only reflects. And sometimes, remembering is louder than any signal. Not long ago, a small amateur observatory in rural Argentina recorded a flicker on the moon, a pinpoint flash on the edge of Lacus Somniorum, the Lake of Dreams. It lasted less than a second. No meteor was tracked, no debris found, just a flash, brief, white-blue, silent, another transient lunar phenomenon. But that's the term we always use. Transient, as if naming it removes its meaning, as if repetition makes it disappear. For centuries, these events have been observed. Strange lights, sudden color shifts, localized glows on a world that should not glow. Scientists catalog them, classify, minimize, and move on. But ancient cultures did not call these flashes transient. They called them reminders. In Inuit cosmology, the moon is Anengak, the one who listens beneath the ice. Not ice in the literal sense, but a metaphor for stillness. He is said to blinker when a boundary has been crossed, when a soul forgets its name or a village strays too far from memory. That blink, they say, is a correction. Not punishment, not omen, realignment. But what does it mean for a moon to correct? That word belongs to systems, to software, to intelligence. A satellite can correct course, a machine can adjust power, a system can run diagnostics. So when the moon flickers, when it sings, rings, or reflects unexpectedly, is it simply reacting, or is it responding? And if it responds, to whom? There's a story, not well known, from a Cold War intelligence debrief in the 1980s. A former Soviet technician reportedly confessed that high-frequency whispers were detected coming from the moon during certain sunspot cycles. Not radio noise, not echoes, something else. When asked what he meant by whispers, he replied, "It's like something repeating back, but distorted, not words, impressions." No document confirms this, only a second-hand report. But there is a strange consistency in these claims, of the moon returning not signal, but feeling, emotion, vision, vibration, as though its memory were not digital but emotional. What if its data is not stored in files, but in mood, in frequency fields? What if the moon is an archive of not what happened, but how it felt? Ancient civilizations believed this. In the lore of the Chumash people of coastal California, the moon is not a goddess or god, but a weaver, a being who records human experience in thread light and reflects it back as dreams. They believed the full moon was heaviest because it carried the most memory. Heaviest, a poetic image or a physical truth, because something strange happens during supermoons, when the moon is closest to Earth. Tides rise, yes. Sleep cycles shift. Migratory animals detour, but hospitals also report subtle spikes in births, cardiac events, psychiatric episodes. Coincidence or resonance? A full close moon reflects more than light. It reflects influence. And maybe that's part of the design. In 2006, NASA launched the Selene mission, or Kaguya, as it was known in Japan. Among the instruments aboard was a gravity gradiometer, designed to detect variations in subsurface mass. When it passed over Oceanus Procellarum, the ocean of storms, it detected not just mass differences, but voids, cavities, pockets, caverns. At first, these were thought to be collapsed lava tubes, but their geometry was strange. Too smooth, too large. Some extended for kilometers beneath the regolith, maintaining a nearly perfect diameter. The data suggested not random collapse, but sustained emptiness. Rooms, tunnels, shells. Again, we're told, no conclusive evidence. But that doesn't mean no structure. It only means not ours. In Buddhist iconography, the moon is often depicted behind Avalokiteshvara. the bodhisattva of compassion, not as scenery, but as mirror. A symbol of the boundless field of awareness. It reflects, they say, without judgment. It holds everything, but clings to nothing. This is more than metaphor. It is description, a description of a machine that receives input but alters nothing, that stores by reflection, that watches without acting, unless called, unless activated. In modern terms, we might call it a passive interface, a storage layer, a backup system for Earth's experiential field. But why would such a system exist? Who would build it? And what for? There is an old idea in esoteric philosophy that memory is the scaffolding of identity, that when a species forgets its origins, it risks collapse, not just of civilization, but of purpose. It becomes vulnerable to disorientation, entropy, external control. What prevents that? Reminders? Anchors? Artifacts of origin embedded in environment. Perhaps the moon is such an artifact. A fail-safe, not meant to intervene, only to remind, until the species it watches remembers what it is, or remembers how to ask, because all memory retrieval is initiated by a query. Even in myth, this holds true. The Sumerians said that Nana, the moon god, would only respond when asked in the right tone. The Greeks said Selene answered prayers spoken without shame or doubt. The Hindus said Chandra could only be invoked through mantra. Every tradition encodes this idea. The moon hears, but only when called correctly. And perhaps this is the final barrier, not one of technology or distance, but of consciousness. Perhaps the moon has been waiting not for rockets, not for rovers, not for code, but for a frequency of remembering, the right chord, the right alignment of intention, humility, and awareness, not an activation code, a recognition. And maybe that's what the flickers mean. Maybe the flashes, the hums, the thermal pulses, the unexplained echoes are responses, not to machines, but to minds, to questions unspoken but felt, to the first stirrings of species-wide awakening, the kind that asks not, what is the moon, but who are we beneath it? And perhaps when that question becomes steady, when it is no longer a flicker but a beam, the moon will answer, not with light, but with memory. Somewhere above us it turns, not rapidly, not noisily, but with purpose. The moon, silent, slow, suspended, follows us through every hour, every season, every collapse and rebirth. And all the while, it maintains its position, its distance, its rhythm, never revealing its hidden face, never shifting its voice. But what if that silence is not absence? What if it's restraint? In Islamic tradition, the moon is not just light. It is proof, a sign given to those who wait. In the Quran, the splitting of the moon is a miracle, not to display power, but to awaken remembrance, and remembrance in Arabic is dhikr, a word that means both memory and invocation, a cycle of calling and receiving. What if the moon is waiting for that cycle to complete? Not in faith, in frequency, because everything returns to pattern. The ancient Chinese described the moon's phases as breaths, inhalations and exhalations of the sky's deeper body. The waxing moon was the intake of memory, the waning moon, the exhale of distortion. Each month, the sky resets itself, clears the code, flushes the excess. This wasn't poetry, it was protocol, the moon as biological regulator, not just of tide, but of psychic rhythm. If true, if even a fraction of that mythos holds some lost scientific echo, then we are living under a regulator that no longer regulates. A program still running, but misaligned. a cycle still breathing, but off-tempo. Could that explain the dissonance we feel, the internal fragmentation, the cultural forgetting? Could the moon's malfunction, or its intentional dormancy, be part of a larger forgetting? In 1968, the Apollo 8 crew became the first humans to witness the moon's far side with their own eyes. No cameras, no filters, just vision. And what they reported, off-record, was not awe. It was unease, dark, unfamiliar. Not because of the lack of light, but because it felt different. One astronaut would later describe it as a place that never expected to be seen. It wasn't hiding. It had simply been alone too long. But that moment, Earthrise, was also a return. A reunion of perspectives. For the first time, the moon watched humanity watching itself. Maybe that's why it holds one face toward us, not to conceal, but to reflect. Not light, but mind. To show us a version of ourselves we no longer perceive directly. A cosmic mirror, a feedback loop, a teacher whose lessons are silent, unless asked the right question. But what is the right question? And are we asking it yet? In 2024, astronomers at the South Pole Telescope Array detected unexplained gravitational lensing in the vicinity of the moon's orbital plane. It wasn't strong, it wasn't constant. But for 3 nights, the readings suggested a deviation, a slight bending of background microwave radiation. No mass could be identified, no anomaly mapped. But something changed, and then, just as quickly, it stopped. 3 days, a ripple, a glitch, or a response? Perhaps the moon isn't the object. Perhaps it's the key to something else, an index, a switch, one that interfaces not with machines but with realities, because hidden in quantum theory is a radical idea, that multiple realities exist, but only one is collapsed through observation. What if the moon is part of that collapse mechanism? What if it anchors not gravity, but coherence? And when it flickers, we shift, not physically, perceptually. Myths allude to this. The Cherokee speak of a time of no moon, when the sky turned without her, and people could not tell waking from dream. In those days, they say, stories walked among the living, not told, but embodied. A thinness in the veil, a liquidity in the real. The moon's absence didn't bring darkness, it brought too much visibility. Perhaps its function is not to illuminate, but to filter, to protect us from too much truth at once, to modulate the transmission of the real. And if that filter fails, what happens? What do we see? Or remember? In 1975, an obscure Russian science journal published an essay titled Celestial Shells and the Frequency of Thought. It suggested, without claiming, that certain orbital bodies, including the moon, might serve as amplifiers of consciousness, that their geometry, mineral content, and position were engineered to resonate with neural fields, not just on Earth, but across systems. It was dismissed as fringe, filed under pseudoscience. But quietly, some engineers began running simulations, not to find answers, but to understand the question. Could a structure as large as the moon resonate? Could it conduct consciousness? And could that conduction be selective? Only activated when the field reached a certain threshold? When thought became coherent? When a species remembered? We know from neurobiology that the brain operates in synchronized waves, beta, alpha, theta, delta, each associated with different states. Awake, dreaming, meditative, transcendent. What if the moon responds only to one? What if it is waiting for a collective brainwave, a species-level harmonic that has not yet arrived? Not because we are incapable, but because we have forgotten how. The ancient Egyptian Dendera zodiac depicts lunar cycles not as orbits, but as spirals, concentric, ascending paths. The moon moves not in a circle, but in a staircase, a recursion, a loop that climbs. Each full moon is not a repetition. It is a return, at a slightly higher octave, unless the climb is broken, unless we loop back to the same questions again and again without asking differently. What if the moon has been answering all along, and we've been asking in static? Language is noise, so are rockets, so is data, but intention, collective, aligned, resonant, that might be signal. And maybe, once, we knew how to send it. Maybe that's what the temples were. Maybe that's what the alignments were for, to pulse upward, to synchronize, to ping the moon, not with technology, but with awareness. And maybe, in forgotten ages, the moon responded, not with words, but with permission, a brief lifting of the veil, a moment of seeing through, of remembering where and what we truly are. There is a place on the moon called Sinus Medi, the Bay of the Center. It lies almost exactly in the middle of the Earth-facing side, equidistant from the moon's eastern and western limbs. From Earth, it looks unremarkable, a shallow depression, a basin among many. But its placement is nearly perfect. When early astronomers began mapping lunar coordinates, they made this point their zero, the moon's origin point, its eye, and in a way it watches back. It was in Sinus Medi that Surveyor 6 landed in 1967, capturing the first liftoff from the lunar surface. The mission was a success, but the engineers reported something odd. When the lander's engines fired in low gravity, the dust kicked up did not behave as expected. Instead of dispersing outward in a chaotic cloud, it formed a ring, briefly symmetrical, strangely coherent, like a pressure wave trapped inside something. They noted it. Then they moved on. But that moment, a pulse, a shape, a whisper in dust, might have been a clue, because symmetry is never random, especially not in dust, especially not there. Across cultures, symmetry marks sacredness, mandalas, labyrinths, crop circles, even the layout of megalithic sites. Not because humans love order, but because symmetry responds. It carries force, it amplifies signal, it holds memory, and perhaps it activates gates. In the Book of Enoch, long excluded from canonical texts, the moon is described as part of a great mechanism. The Watchers, celestial beings cast down for their rebellion, are said to have sealed their wisdom in the vessel of night. That vessel, many scholars believe, is the moon. Enoch walks among them and learns the laws of motion and light. He calls the moon the house of cycles, the wheel of time's memory, not metaphor, machine. And sealed machines are often time-locked, waiting, dormant, programmed to awaken under conditions not yet met. Is the moon such a vessel? If so, what conditions does it wait for? Not technological, perhaps? Not material, but mental, cognitive, aligned not to tools, but to conscious thresholds. We tend to think of technology as wires, chips, panels. But a more advanced civilization might design with fields, harmonics, resonance. Their architecture would look like geology. Their devices might masquerade as moons. And their locks might require intention, not code. There's an idea in ancient Taoist alchemy that the moon is a container of the pre-birth essence, that before form, before identity, there is a pure vibration, and the moon reflects it. If one aligns their breath, their posture, their mind during the full moon, They can momentarily step behind the veil and access what they were before they were named. Again, we dismiss it. Mysticism. Symbol. But what if it's memory? Not personal. Planetary. What if the moon does more than reflect sunlight? What if it reflects the original state? The template. And what happens when a civilization deviates too far from that template? In 1999, a French satellite orbiting the moon recorded a brief, low-frequency tone emanating from the western edge of Mare Cognitum, the sea that has become known. The signal lasted 4 minutes. It was below human hearing, nearly missed, but what made it unique was its harmonic signature, a descending scale, mathematically precise, with intervals consistent with early Pythagorean tuning. A song. No origin was ever confirmed, no repetition ever recorded. Just one tone, perfect, inexplicable, as if the moon had exhaled. Not noise, not alarm, an invitation or a test. In some indigenous Amazonian myths, the moon is a flute, not an instrument played on Earth, but one played through Earth. The shaman listens, they say, not to speak with spirits, but to remember what the Earth once sounded like, before humans arrived. The moon, in this context, is a tuner, a calibration device. And if it tunes Earth, it must also tune what grows on Earth, including us. Perhaps that explains the subtle biological rhythms we still can't account for. Fertility cycles, growth waves in plants, migration pulses in animals. They don't sync with sunlight, not precisely, but the moon, even in absence, leaves its imprint. And maybe we, too, are imprintable, shaped not just by environment, but by patterned light, encoded influence. That influence may not be neutral, or benevolent, or even intentional anymore. Perhaps the program has run too long, or perhaps it was never for us. There's an inscription at the temple of Hathor in Dendera, Egypt, almost erased, faint under centuries of soot. It reads, "She who brings down the net of stars through which the world was formed." The net. A grid. A structure through which form is woven. Was the moon part of that net? A node? A transmitter? And what if, over time, the net frayed? In 2010, LRO imagery revealed long, thin rills on the far side of the moon, valleys so narrow and winding they resemble veins. They do not match expected patterns of lava flow. They cross angles inconsistent with random formation, some even loop. Veins, circuits, channels. Are they dead or waiting? Are they relics or conduits? And if we learn how to speak through them, not with metal, but with mind, what would the moon return? What has it stored? More importantly, what has it filtered? Because in every system there is a difference between storage and curation. The moon may not just reflect memory. It may have edited it. Perhaps that's what forgetting really is. Not a loss, but a shielding, a firewall. Until we're ready. Until the moon opens. And what then? A message? A mirror? Or a realignment so complete that everything we call history dissolves, not into fantasy, but into function. Because sometimes a device doesn't explain itself. It simply activates, and function becomes truth. The moon is full tonight. You can feel it, not with your eyes, but in your bones, in the subtle change of pressure beneath your skin, in the hush between thoughts. It isn't brighter, it's deeper. It doesn't illuminate, it pulls. And maybe, just maybe, it remembers. Throughout this journey we've followed a trail of fragments, myths, anomalies, alignments, tones, none complete, none conclusive, but together they form something more than a theory, They form a pattern. And in ancient systems, from Vedic chants to digital code, pattern is intelligence. Pattern is will. So if the moon is patterned, in orbit, in structure, in influence, then it is not passive. It is participating. But in what? In Tibetan cosmology, the moon is the vessel of the clear light, the primal awareness that precedes thought, form, and self. At the moment of death, it is said, consciousness briefly merges with this light before re-entering the cycle. The moon guides. It reflects not just the sun, but the state before time. And perhaps that's why it's here. Not as a machine in the way we understand machines, but as a device for memory, a stabilizer of awareness, a regulator of cycles older than matter, a system embedded not in physics, but in perception, in the way we experience time, space, self. And maybe, as we forget the rhythms, the moon forgets us, like an interface deactivated from lack of input. But something strange is happening. In recent years, reports of moon-related phenomena have increased. Flashes, sounds, internal tremors, magnetic anomalies, signals, weak, fragmented, unclaimed. Maybe it's coincidence, maybe it's instrumentation, or maybe it's us. Maybe we're waking up just enough to ping the system, to reactivate fragments. Because memory works like that. A scent, a tone, a gesture, and a door opens. You don't remember everything. Just enough to know you've forgotten something important. Perhaps that's what the moon has been doing all along, holding that door open, but only slightly. Only for those who learn how to look sideways, like the way you catch a dream just before it dissolves, or the way ancient temples align not to the object itself, but to the shadow it casts on a solstice morning. Indirect, deliberate, coded. In Mayan astronomy, the moon is not a singular object, but a cycle within a cycle, a gear inside the great mechanism. Their codices track its movements with uncanny precision, folding its phases into prophecies and resets. They believed that every full moon in certain long-count intervals was a potential pivot, a moment when timelines branched, a decision point, a test. But not a test of power, a test of remembrance. Can a species remember what it is before it destroys itself? Can it resync with the greater system before the program crashes? In systems design, fail-safes are often embedded deep, activated only under conditions of near collapse, when standard inputs fail, when default patterns deviate beyond repair. Then, and only then, the fallback protocol runs. What if the moon is that fallback, not just for Earth, for consciousness itself, a beacon left behind by whoever, or whatever, seeded awareness in this solar cradle? Not to save us, but to restart us, to recalibrate what we forgot how to feel. Because forgetting is not just loss, it is drift, a gradual erosion of coherence, and maybe that's what the moon records, not events. Drift, so that when the pulse grows weak, when the signal is almost lost, the moon can offer a memory, a glint in the water, a flash in the sky, a silence that sounds like your name. And maybe that's enough. Maybe remembering doesn't require total recovery. Maybe it only requires willingness, a shift in frequency, a whisper sent upward, we're still here. And in that moment, maybe the moon listens, not to words, not to code, to recognition, because all this time we've been trying to figure out what the moon is. But perhaps the question is, who are we when we stand beneath it? What do we become when we gaze upward, not with conquest, not with analysis, but with humility? What do we see when we stop explaining and begin listening? In the darkness, a silver arc rises. You watch it, it watches back, no answers, no final message, just reflection, just presence. And the feeling, unprovable, undeniable, that something ancient has always been there, waiting not to be discovered but remembered. A light, a mirror, a wound, a memory.